Hi everyone, good morning. It is November, I have to look at my calendar actually, November 23rd, 2015, and this is Kathy Randall from your aEEG coach, and just wanted to say hello and happy holidays. I can't believe that this week is Thanksgiving. So anyways, I am back safe and sound from Zambia and had an amazing trip to Africa and would love to just be sharing all of my amazing photos with you instead of talking about aEEG. But nonetheless, it is Monday, so this means it is our Q&A Monday. So one of the questions, I actually was in Salt Lake City last week doing some lectures, and one of the questions I get so frequently is about duration of monitoring. So I thought I would just chat with you a little bit about that. So anyways, so I'm going to just make this full screen and hopefully that will work out. And here we go. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think is the number one myth about video EEG and the number one protocol mistake that we make in using aEEG. And so I think that these go together quite well. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about duration of monitoring. So number one, I think the number one myth about video or continuous EEG is that we think that when someone comes from the EEG or the neurodiagnostics lab and they put on these full montage electrodes, I think that many people believe that that continuous EEG is being continuously reviewed. And this is actually a very rare situation. It is, and so this is why I wanted to call it a number one myth, because a lot of times we think that just because we have access to really good continuous video 24-hour EEG, we don't need aEEG in our units. And this couldn't be further from the truth. So if you actually look into the American Clinical Neurophysiology Society guidelines, so the ACNS, so ACNS guidelines, they actually talk about what the guidelines are and the gold standard, I guess, for continuous EEG in neonates. So this is a fantastic free publication that anyone can download. And if you have not reviewed it as a standard for your NICU to give you power to talk about why we need to be doing more monitoring, this is a document that you must download today. So some of the standards that they mention for interpretation are remote access. So this helps with timely interpretation. But this is not always possible in every NICU around the world. So remote access is great, but it is not always available. So when you put EEG on, the EEG tech is supposed to stay at the bedside to ensure a very quality tracing for the first hour. So I know that this happens pretty consistently in most units, but it's not always possible, right? These EEG techs are oftentimes running around with multiple responsibilities across multiple floors and departments. But this is, again, the standard that we would like to be able to hold our departments to if we're going to be doing continuous video EEG. The next thing is that the initial hour or two in many hospitals of that full EEG should be reviewed by your neurophysiologist as soon as possible. After that initial review, the review will happen at least twice daily. So if a baby is in status, obviously people are probably going to be looking at it more frequently, but what you need to know is that the standard is that that first hour or two of EEG is reviewed as soon as possible, and then just twice daily reviews occur of that full EEG. Daily written reports are done. There are sometimes verbal reports that are happening as needed, and event markers that we place, so especially if it's your full video EEG, if you use that push button or bedside logs or whatever other way of communicating events are helpful, you can pass these along to your neurophysiologist or your EEG interpretation helpers. So anyways, the other piece I wanted to say is some centers do have real-time review, meaning true neurotelemetry where someone is reviewing your EEG all the time. Other centers, and this is really most centers, have intermittent review by neurophysiologists. So they might know that they have a baby in the NICU who's undergoing cooling, who is in hour 12 or hour 18, and they, in between patients in their clinics or rounding on other departments, will look into and see how it's going with the EEG. So this is great, but it is intermittent review. And so where aEEG becomes so powerful is when we can combine it with this full video EEG and use the bedside trend to help us identify areas of concern and then alert our colleagues who are not continuously at the bedside. So again, this partnership between the NICU staff and our neuro department is so critical. So I've said it 100 times, and I just have to say it again. The number one mistake that we make with aEEG is limiting the use of aEEG to just our cooling babies. And although I believe that aEEG is extremely important during cooling, it is by far not the only time we should be using it. So we want to create a protocol that allows our staff to frequently use aEEG, or they simply will not get enough exposure. They will not be able to maintain their confidence or their competence in reading aEEG. So this is why I'm a strong advocate of at least creating a priority list of standing patients in your unit who should be monitored, so that there is no mistake about when you should go and get your aEEG monitor. So as many of you know, I do a lot of work with Stanford with their Neuro-NICU, and our top 10 list that we created back in 2012 has now evolved into our top 12 list. And this is just a very simple document that we've created there, and we post it up in the call rooms and around at the bedside so that people are really clear about when we are admitting babies to our Neuro-NICU. And if you don't have a Neuro-NICU, that doesn't matter. If you have an aEEG device, you can create a document like this of the diagnoses in your unit and when you want to begin monitoring. And you can even include how long that monitoring should include or should continue. So for example, our HIE and cooling babies. Well, we love at Stanford to start doing aEEG and NIRS immediately upon admission for these babies. We also get video EEG, if we can, as soon as possible. But no matter what, with our video EEG, we always display the aEEG trend because our full video EEG machines allow for that. If your video EEG machine doesn't allow for that, then you need to add on your aEEG device, so right alongside your video EEG, so that you can see the trending that is so critical and so instrumental and integral to our aEEG devices. So HIE and cooling, we monitor these babies from admission for their entire 72 hours. So again, not every hospital has the resources to be doing continuous video EEG for the entire 72 hours. Maybe they do for the first 24, they take it off for the middle 24, maybe they put it on again at rewarming, but we can leave aEEG on continuously from beginning through initiation of cooling, maintenance of cooling, and rewarming. And if that baby's had seizures, we want to continue to monitor that baby until they are at least 24 hours of seizure-free, electrographically seizure-free. So that goes for our seizure babies. For our ECMO patients, we typically do NIRS, and then you can go on and see, of course, babies with grade 3 and grade 4, IVH with bleeds, they are very much at risk for seizures, especially subclinical seizures, because again, premature infants have such a difficult time propagating clinical seizures. So we want to be looking for those subclinical seizures in those babies. Metabolic disease, these are babies who oftentimes come into the unit encephalopathic a couple days of life. So we want to be sure that we are looking at these babies and also trending the aEEG background as their metabolic disease begins to be treated and brought back under control. So anyways, this is just an idea, a totally easy spreadsheet you can make for your unit and post it up and around so that you have a systematic way of utilizing your aEEG as often as possible. So in many of my lectures, I talk about who could we monitor, who are the potential babies that we could be using aEEG for. Babies who've had a stroke. If they're not already being video monitored, we should be using aEEG for these babies. These babies oftentimes have seizures. Neonatal abstinence. These are babies who have abnormal background activity, oftentimes have disrupted sleep-wake cycling. Congenital heart disease is a big group that really are at risk, and probably we should do a whole entire Q&A call just about the risk factors for our cardiac babies. But definitely we know that they have disrupted sleep-wake cycles when they have hypoxic saturations. We also know that they have disrupted sleep-wake cycles as well. So these are very, and about a third of them have seizures. So a really big group that could be monitored with bedside tools. When we talk about our preterm babies, we know that there's not the prognostic value that we have with our term babies, but there is a lot of powerful data that we can get from our preterm babies. Certainly post-cardiac arrest or post-code, we want to, those are a great time to be looking at the overall effect that that event has had on the brain and maybe even the recovery over the next 24 hours. I've mentioned IVH, seizures. We know sepsis is a huge impact on background pattern and sleep, as well as just kind of general check-ins around maturation. So there's just a huge opportunity for utilizing aEEG with many, many babies in the NICU. And again, I think our biggest mistake that we make is thinking that we, number one, have video EEG and that someone is looking at it 24/7, which they are not. And the other mistake is just to save our aEEG monitors for times when we think that, it's a very high risk situation. So I think that that's a mistake because we lose our ability to stay really comfortable with the equipment as well as the application and interpretation. And so we just kind of lose out on making this part of our practice. So just as a reminder, with aEEG, despite the fact that it's only several electrodes, we can use it to appreciate many things. We can look at overall background activity. That's that strength of the brain. We know that especially on our cooling babies, that background activity is very strongly related to prognosis and especially the evolution of that background pattern. The other piece is looking at sleep-wake patterns. Again, not to pick on our cooling babies, but we know that the reemergence of sleep-wake patterns is extremely powerful when it comes to prognosis as well. Especially, I was just mentioning the cardiac babies, looking for any discontinuity as well as lack of sleep-wake patterns is a really important piece of that. Looking for seizures, especially in these babies where you just aren't quite sure and you don't have a high enough suspicion to order a full video EEG. aEEG can sometimes help fill in that gap. And you might not see full-blown seizures, but maybe you just see enough unusual activity that you can't wrap your head around that allows you to just feel more confident in ordering that full video EEG for 24 hours or even for a spot check because you just have that level of suspicion. And then of course with aEEG, when you have more than one channel or you have 2 electrodes on one side and 2 electrodes on the other side, you can see that symmetry between those hemispheres, which can sometimes lead us down to understand that babies might have had a stroke if they're not seizing. Just again, a reminder of how we read our aEEG. This is a simplistic view of just a 2-channel aEEG where you have 10 seconds of EEG at the top, and then you have 3 or 4 hours of aEEG at the bottom. This device allows you to see left and right, and of EEG, and then left and right aEEG. And remember, when we interpret it, we are looking at that blue band, and we want to interpret each hemisphere separately. We want to look for background. We want to look for sleep. Then we can go to the other side, look for background and sleep. We can classify those as present and absent sleep cycling. We can classify the pattern as continuous or discontinuous or burst suppression. Then we can begin to look at symmetry. Are the patterns symmetrical? Are they the left and the right? Are they both continuous? Are they both discontinuous? Then we can begin to look for areas of suspicion. So like here, we have this area that looks like a seizure, and we can investigate that and decide if it's seizure or artifact. And then we can compare this 3 or 4 hour span to yesterday to later in the day, and we can begin to see a trend over time. So there's just so much we can get out of our aEEG, and especially on those babies where we have video EEG for 24 hours, there is so much data there to review that it's almost impossible, and definitely outside our scope of reality, to be able to do in the NICU on a really consistent basis, to review full EEG. But using the trend of aEEG is so easy, and yet gives us so much information that we really should be using it as much as we can. So that is all I had for you today. The number one myth about full continuous EEG, and then the number one mistake that we make in protocols and monitoring in the NICU. So that is all I have for today. I look forward to seeing you on Facebook, as well as feel free always to email me if you have any questions. And our next Q&A Monday will be Monday, December 21st. So for now, I hope you have an amazing holiday season, and I will talk to you soon.